Crop Talk on Market Journal is supported by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Finally today, we're going to be focusing on maturing corn and the impacts of corn nematode. We recently had the opportunity to catch up with Nebraska Extension's Tamra Jackson-Ziems to learn more about this topic and some ways that producers can mitigate its effects. Let's talk about this subject. You told me you could fill 20 minutes. We'll try to get it out a little quicker than that, but how does someone know if they have a problem with corn nematodes?
Well, nematodes are complicated. We could talk for a long time about this. The gist of it is that every field has plant parasitic nematodes, and which ones you have and how many there are really determines whether you have a problem or not. And you won't know that until you sample for them. But you know, this time of year in the early part of the season is when you might see symptoms in those plants, and it'll help you pinpoint where those spots are to target for sampling.
Sampling is important, as you're pointing out here. How do you go about sampling? I know it varies for different soil types.
It does, and so this is part of the complicated part. It's not as easy as sampling for soybean cyst nematode and soybean that you can do any time of year. In corn, we recommend early in the season, and especially and only sample early in the season by about V5 or V6 if it's sandy. And that's because certain nematodes that require sand and actually cause some of the greatest damage, like needle, sting, stubby root nematodes, they can travel deep in the soil and out of reach of your soil probes. And so that's the only time of the season you're going to catch them in the shallow root zone. And so sampling by V6 is critical. If it's a heavier soil, you know, you can wait later on in the season, even until the end. The important thing, though, I want to remind everybody is some of those nematodes go inside the root, and some of them can be only on the outside, or some will go in and out. It's really important that the lab that you submit samples to also processes the nematodes that are inside the root to give you a better estimate of what's really out there.
That's an important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. I guess let's back up a bit. If I'm walking around my cornfield, how do I know if I have a challenge here?
So often you see patches of stunted plants. They can be in patches, but they can also be individual plants. If you carefully dig them up, you'll see what could be some pretty serious root symptoms too. Roots that might be really darkly discolored, have lesions, the tips might be nubbed off. They may have bottle brushing, and there's a lot of types of symptoms. That's a good reminder that we have a lot of different nematodes out there, at least half a dozen different genera, and even within each one of those, we say genera, words that you may recognize like the needle, the sting, the stubby root, lance, lesion, multiple species of each one of those at some point too.
So identify there's a potential problem, do the samples, comes back, shows yes indeed it's high. Is there a threshold, I guess, for some sort of treatment or something you can do if you do have high corn nematodes in your fields?
And that's difficult. So we don't have treatment thresholds exactly, but we do have some basic guidelines. And so we assume that the damage that each one of these nematode types can be cumulative in nature. And so it's important to know what's out there again, though. And so at some point, it's just really difficult to make that decision. Those nematodes are always in that field. They may not always cause the level of symptoms every year. During a dry year that we might be starting out as, you often will see those symptoms because the root damage that's going on out there, the plant can't overcome it as well without adequate moisture. And so you might see those symptoms. The nematodes have been there all along. Sometimes they peak, and the populations are higher though. And so it's just something to keep in mind. And we do have seed treatment nematicides that are available in corn. Often in the past we've used a lot more of maybe some of the infragranular type products that we also used long ago as insecticides. Some of those are very toxic, and there's limited ways to apply them now, and so we've moved further away from those.
To your point, crop rotations, you tell me those are important here. Tell me more.
Well, it can be, and so the confusing part of this is if you've got this zoo of nematodes in your field, which is often several different kinds, some of them prefer corn even if they can feed on other crops like soybean or wheat, even weed species. And so some of those, you may see a benefit from crop rotation, for example with soybean, because they're not as good of a host. Corn roots are really big. They have a lot of what we call feeding sites, a lot of surface area. And so crop rotation can often benefit you. It might not get rid of the problem though, and so if you have a really bad nematode problem, you might have to use a combination of tactics to try to reduce or mitigate that damage.
All right, I'm going to open Pandora's box here with this next question for you. About a month from now, what are the biggest corn diseases we need to be watching out for?
So that'd be about mid-season, and so a lot of that depends on the weather. And so one of the things that we're watching closely, of course, is tar spot has moved into our state the last couple of years. And tar spot likes cooler conditions. If temperatures are lower, like nighttime temperatures, we're going to see that start up at some point. Probably more likely toward the end of the season, but it can start anytime we have those cooler conditions. And so watch for tar spot. More commonly, bacterial diseases in Nebraska have been common the last, well, forever, I guess now. Bacterial leaf streak. If we've had damaging storms, you might see some Goss's wilt showing up around the state. If we get really warm and humid, you're going to see the normal gray leaf spot show up. And so just keep a watch out, know what's going on out there, and if you need any assistance identifying what those problems are, please submit a sample to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic and let us know what you're seeing out there.
It's a good point or good place to put a pause on today's conversation, knowing we're going to have you back many times over this growing season, I'm sure. That is Tamra Jackson-Ziems, our guest today on Crop Talk.